see me.
Tamsa, everybody, welcome. I'm just going to let everybody start to roll in. We have a lot of attendees that are rolling in right now, so welcome, thank you. If you want, you can get started by telling us where you're from or where you're joining us from in the chat box.
The chat box is disabled, Rebecca. So people are putting it in the Q&A section.
Okay. Thank you for letting us know.
Can we open the chat for attendees?
It should be open.
Okay, it should be open now. Should we try it, folks? Nope, doesn't look like it. Oh, technology. Sometimes we love it. Sometimes it doesn't work. Oh, there we go. The chat box is officially open for attendees. While folks are doing that, Rebecca, do you want to go over the fact that we have translation today?
Yes, hello, everybody. We are doing a live translation for French, from English to French. So if you guys have used or are using the French translation, please let us know in the chat box so that we can keep track of how many of our French speakers are out there and utilizing this, this service. Thank you.
And just to give it, for those that might not have used Zoom translation, there's a little box that says interpretation, and you just choose your language, French, or English. I mean, if it's English, then it's just us, but yeah, you can choose your language under the little interpretation guy. It should be available both on your phone, tablet, or computer.
We'll get started in 1 or 2 minutes here. Okay, so being mindful of Sophia and Ariel's time, we'll just get started as people roll in and they'll get to know a little bit about all of us. Thank you so much for coming to join us today. Sorry, I'm like technology. I have like a couple of computers going right now, but I wanted to give an update on decolonizing climate policy as a webinar. So this started back in, I think, October of last year, where we had teamed up with ICA and Dr. Jen Gobi on a phase 1 report on a critique of the Pan-Canadian framework and the healthy environment, healthy economy, which was released as a report just this past March. We have asked Sophia to come and talk to us a little bit about what that work looks like in action and how we decolonize policy or deconstruct policy to an Indigenous worldview. From the report that we released in March, we found that the climate policy in Canada was failing to drive a scale of climate action that was actually needed for Indigenous folks, including policy that may exacerbate existing economic and social inequalities, excluding Indigenous peoples from policymaking tables, thereby violating Indigenous rights to free, prior, and informed consent. So part of the work that we're doing in phase 2 is we have found an Indigenous-led climate policy advisory council, which is leading our phase 2 in many different areas. So one of them being a survey, which we will be releasing to Indigenous folks that want to get included on this climate talk, which will happen in August. We hope to have it released on a website that you can find at indigenousclimateaction.com in August. It's not released just yet, just so everybody knows. But if you want to get involved in the conversation prior to that, you can email me at climatepolicy@indigenousclimateaction.com, which we'll put in the chat box. So I guess like it's so weird to be in Zoom calls, because like when we're in person, I'm just as goofy and scattered in person too. But part of this, I hope that when we have these Zoom calls, we start to emanate the relationships or the sharing circles or the storytelling that we have with our, the way we have in our communities, the way we have relationships with our other Indigenous folks. So with that respect, I'm going to just introduce myself. So tansay all of you. I'm Rebecca Sinclair, Osawe Musqueam, Squayun, Nasidalaswan, Ocheniada, Barrenlands First Nation, which is in Brochet, Manitoba, and I'm a member of Little Saskatchewan First Nation. So I will hand it off to Ariel and Sophia for the rest of the portion.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's been so great to have you join Indigenous Climate Action. And just to introduce myself, Iklanete, Dene Sotlaneta, Ariel Tsaekwe Hushe, Duranje Betsy Nihasli. So my name is Ariel Tsaekwe Duranje, and I'm a member of the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, also known as the Kaitali Dene Sotlane, and we are members of Treaty 8 territory in Northern Alberta. My community is located in Fort Chipewyan, Alberta, and we are downstream from the largest industrial project on planet Earth, the Alberta tar sands. And I'm currently the executive director and one of the co-founders of Indigenous Climate Action, and just really excited for today's webinar series. So the first of the Decolonizing Climate Policy webinar series, and we're hoping to have one webinar a month for the next 4 months to really dive deep into the work that Rebecca has been a part of. And what a beautiful way to really start this series with decolonizing policy and the land that life gives. And having join us today, a grandmother and a knowledge keeper, Sophia Rabloskis, and her involvement in the Pimachiowin Aki project and the World Heritage Site. So just to start off, I just want to recognize and honor your time, Sophia, for joining us here. And I know I didn't speak your name proper, the name of your project properly. I'm not Anishinaabe, I'm trying my best, so please forgive me. So I'm going to introduce Sophia, and then I invite you to introduce yourself however you feel. But Sophia is a member of the Poplar River First Nation and has lived there all her life. Sophia graduated from the University of Manitoba with a Bachelor's of Human Ecology. She has also worked with Poplar River youth, sharing the connections between traditional teachings, Anishinaabe language, land, and life. She has worked as a coordinator and spokesperson for the Pimachiowin, I'm saying that wrong, Pimachiowin Aki World Heritage for over 10 years. Sophia has been recognized locally and internationally for her efforts to protect Poplar River's traditional territory. She has been awarded the Goldman Environmental Prize in 2007, the Order of Manitoba, the Oscar Laughlin Memorial Award, and the Outstanding Commitment to the Environment Award for Earth Day. And we're so honored to have Sophia join us to share knowledge and stories with us as we look at what decolonizing policy really means for us as Indigenous peoples. And with that, I would welcome Sophia to do your own introduction and let us know a little bit about who you are.
Okay, so Anin Kinawia, I bring greetings from my home community of Poplar River. Like she said, my name is Sophia Rabloskis, and I'm a grandmother of 3, and I have 3 children, and also I raised my niece, who is been with us since she was quite young. So like I said, I've been here all my life. I was born here and raised. I just left the community for a short time to pursue an education, and came back after that was completed. So Poplar River is actually located 400 kilometers north of Winnipeg, Manitoba, and Winnipeg is the one of the urban, I guess the capital city of Canada, Manitoba. I mean, sorry. And Poplar River is within the boreal forest. And that land we consider to be our traditional territory. And it's approximately 1 million hectares. It's a beautiful place, undeveloped, which means there's no development from any logging or any hydro projects, and that the elders have always reminded us that, you know, we should keep it the way it is, because that was the gift that we have gotten from the Creator. So each generation has a responsibility to carry on that teaching of taking care of the land and to preserve it for future generations. So we keep it for the next generation, and they'll be responsible in keeping it the way it is, as long as they can and as much as they can, in keeping really those responsibilities very seriously. So the work that we started as a community started way back in the 1980s. And it was concern of development coming into our traditional territory. Development of a big, like a mega hydro project, and a logging was mentioned. So the concern came from the elders, and the elders understood, you know, they will change. There will be changes if we do any development. It will change the landscape. It will affect our community, and it will affect everything that's on the land. And I think that's where and all these teachings were taught orally. You know, they talked about it when we were young. As I can remember being young, my grandfather always talking, be careful with that, be gentle with that plant, be gentle on the land. Don't throw anything in the water that doesn't belong in the water. So it was taught at the early age to really take care of what's around you. And time and time again, my father would remind me and to teach my children and their and my grandchildren that if we start to destroy what's around us, we will become as people, and we will suffer, and our community will suffer. And so these things were taught, orally. So when in the mid 1980s, there was talk about development coming into our territory, and that really brought a lot of concern to the elders, because they really believe that the land is alive. The land provides that knowledge and wisdom that we need to survive. It has been their means of survival, their land. And I will come to that when we talk about our land, our World Heritage Site, how that name came about, Pimachiowin Aki. So I think that's when we started to think about, at that time, we didn't think about decolonizing policies at that time. But when they said, we need to be concerned, what's happening. They have these people, they have these planes flying over our traditional territory. You don't see any damage, you don't see any destruction, you don't see anything that's been disrupted. It's a very healthy ecosystem. And then these guys are saying, well, nobody lives there. It's an opportunity to develop. It's an opportunity to go in and do these projects, because nobody lives there, without any understanding or no consideration of the communities and the people that live there. So the east side, people live along that lake, and in the forest, and then trap lines. There's trap lines all over this territory, and so, but they're in their minds, there's no sign of life there, and to for our worldview and our understanding, that was insulting, because there's lots of life there. It's full of life, it's healthy environment. And the animals and the plants and the fish and the lakes and the rivers and the creeks is full of life. So it was something that they did not understand. So I think at that point they made a decision to start documenting history. So we started, the community started the work of documenting stories of how that land has been used for thousands of years without any destruction. And it was the beginning of, compiling all this data, the stories of how important that land meant to the people who live in the community and around there, and how it has been their way of life to protect that. So it was an eye opener, and it was for us to start documenting, doing research, and finding people who will work with us, who think alike, who believe in land preservation. I mean, I've often said that our elders are the true conservationists and preservation of land, because that was within their teachings. And they didn't use those words, they had our own way of explaining about that life on that land, and how it's connected to us, and how sacred it was to the people here and throughout this Anishinaabe land. And so that started. And then, we started working on how are we going to let the government know that there are people here, that we're going to start letting them know and preparing a document that will say there's still people here. There's still people that use that land in trapping, hunting, fishing, picking medicinal plants. So we need it as healthy as possible. They've been doing that for thousands of years, and we want to continue to do that for many generations to come. So I think, we started the process. There was many people involved. We had the fishermen's input, we had the hunters' input, we had the trappers, the young people, and also, whoever was interested in doing that, in getting their stories told. And so that's how the process started. And then because this work has taken like over 15 years of planning. So, I might like sometimes skip and come back, but this work led to joining up with the other First Nations, our neighboring communities, reconnecting with the communities and talking about the importance of working together and the importance of keeping that land the way it is as much as possible. But we have to work with the government to do this, but we wanted to do it our way. And that's when we started working on the land use plan. Land use planning for Anishinaabe has started thousands of years ago. It wasn't anything new, but it was never written down. It was taught through generations, through teachings, through the watching people, how they treat that land, how they treat the animals, with utmost respect, because our life depended on that. We have to really understand that, the importance of that, and the sacredness of that area. And these communities had similar beliefs. They had similar understanding of what our understanding was. So they were neighbors. So, they took it upon themselves to commit to work together. And they developed this First Nations Accord, they called it. So which they agreed to work together, to work together, because when you put people together, communities together, it becomes stronger, and it will be successful because you have your support. And so they made a commitment to do this. And once you do that, other things start to happen. But before I go on to those other things, our community also spent a lot of time talking about how we're going to continue with healing, because we said that the land gives us the wisdom and the knowledge to understand or to know where we're going. And one of the things the elders told us here in the community, if you want to heal your people, if we want to heal our youth, we have to go back to the land. At that time, this was in the late 80s and into the 90s. I didn't understand that myself too, and when they talked about doing this and the funding that time that was opening up to the communities was the Aboriginal Healing Foundation. And then the elders decided, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take our youth, our families, and we're going to take them to that sacred area and we're going to work with them. So in whatever we're going to do from now on, we need to heal our community first. We need to talk about the history. We need to talk about the future and how important it is to be able to teach, but we have to heal, because that land will give us healing. The land of our ancestors are there, and they will provide us guidance and direction of what we need to do. So we, as a community, we built a healing camp. So this healing camp started in maybe June. Sometimes I have started mid-June, end of June. The first meeting in June, the first gathering, was the elders from here and from the other communities, surrounding communities. So the elders would come together and talk about things that are happening in our community. And you know, what should happen in our communities to heal our nation. And then we would invite the families, and our youth would be at the end of June, and they would learn, because a lot of our youth have to leave the community to go to south to continue with their high school, because our community only has grade 9. So we worked with them. We spent some time with them talking about things that they might encounter, and not to forget where they come from. But those camps talked about the history of residential schools, talk about some of the things that are going on in the community and why they're going on, why we don't have our language, why we don't, you know, why we're struggling as people and as a community, and we need to be together. And this gave us an opportunity to kind of like get to know each other again, families, and learn about each other again. We live in the same community, but we've all separated ourselves into our own little family. We didn't have too many community gatherings as they used to. And so this is where people came and learned about traditional ceremonies that we're used to do, because everything that we talked about prior to our healing camps is, this used to happen. This is what we used to do. So there was a disconnect because it was the past, but we still felt disconnected. So we reintroducing traditional ceremonies, traditional way of healing, and just talking to one another was something that we needed to begin.
I would love to, like, I would love to just sort of interject and like hit a couple things and then ask you some questions, just because as we're nearing the halfway point in the hour, I really want to dive deep into some of the things that you've said. Is that okay, Sophia?
Yeah.
Perfect. So some of the things that you've said already is just like, I'm just for your knowledge, I've shared with the viewers a link to the Pimachiowin Aki World Heritage Site, which is so beautiful. Like this process of how you've gotten to there, and then you can look at these fast fact sheets. But it's one of 1,121 World Heritage Sites which exist across the globe. My nation also is within and is situated within a World Heritage Site, but there are only 39 mixed cultural and natural sites, like the Pimachiowin Aki site. And these are really important to understand, that this process that Sophia is talking about, of how we move towards these conservation and protected zones, is needs to be like reevaluated on how we get there. There was recently an article by Vox. Indigenous peoples are the world's biggest conservationists, but they're rarely getting credit for it. And you hit that right on the head in your thing. You said our elders are true conservationists of the land, yet we don't consider ourselves that, because the knowledge and the wisdom of the land is what guides us. That's the other piece that you also stated. And that our oral traditions are how we pass down our responsibilities and help us to keep the land the way that it is. And what this report from Vox also outlines and pays homage to is a report that was recently done by the ICCA consortium that advocates for Indigenous and community-led conservation, really stating that our communities have been at the core of conservation for generations, kind of what everything that you just said, Sophia. But one of the big things that I really want to hit on is this talk of this healing camp and why it's so essential, because in this report, which I'll put a link to in the chat right now, sorry, I'm just going to make sure I send it to everyone, not just to the panelists. It states that Indigenous peoples and local communities face overlapping political and economic interests seeking to either protect, nurture, or exploit nature within their lands and territories. Public and private conservation actors have not adequately implemented existing rights-based commitments, and genuine recognition of and tangible support for Indigenous peoples and local communities' rights and roles in conservation is still relatively marginal. So the work you've done is leading the way to show the importance of Indigenous peoples in guiding these processes for the protection and preservation of our natural world. But when it comes to policy, like we have to start talking about like how we get from point A to point B is so different than the way in which traditional policy is created. And the world policy, just like the traditional forms of conservation, is disconnected from human interactions with the land. It's really predicated on that premise of, man's dominion over, God created this land for us, as opposed to we were created in partnership and in relationship with. So policy also is this disconnection. It's disconnected from our communities. Could you sort of expand a little bit on how policy can work with an Indigenous worldview from your experiences with the Pimachiowin Aki, oh my God, I'm so sorry, Pimachiowin Aki World Heritage Site, and how the differences of how you built these structures and how policy can though work with Indigenous worldview. How can we bring those two together to build these structures to protect and conserve not just our lands and territories, but build policies and practices that work for all of us, for our Indigenous rights, the land, and for the world in which we currently live in?
I think we have, I believe that we have done it. When we did develop our land use plan, the process we took, we written down everything, all our beliefs and values of our Indigenous ways, of how important and sacred they are to the people. We put that in a document. And then we would take our people, our youth, our elders, to the legislative building and told the people in charge, the government, say, this is our land use plan. How are you going to help us, make this part of, to be recognized and to be acknowledged? It took a while. So it finally, after all that negotiations, we did have it legislated. and we were recognized as our traditional territory that still exists and used. So we wanted full control at that time. We had hoped to get full control and say of what happens in our traditional territory. But that didn't exactly happen. They said 50-50, we have 50%, but at that point we said, well, okay, but it doesn't stop there. We will continue to negotiate to try and get that 100%. Maybe not in my lifetime, but I hope that our young people will take that on and continue to pursue it, because that land use plan is who we are. Everything that we believe in is in that document. And when we first started documenting, a lot of our elders were reluctant to document, and but they agreed, because if it's going to help our young people and the ones that are not here yet, they always say, is we have to start documenting. So we have that documentation, we have that. So I'll try to speed it up a little bit more to how we came to decide to do the land, the World Heritage Site. And also to remember that in our language, we don't understand policy. It's always been mixed with policing. We don't understand that. In our language, in our way of life, we didn't know that we had our own governance, and it worked really well for the people. Policy is something that is forced upon people to do something, to follow. Sometimes it creates conflicts rather than resolve anything. So that's why when we first started the work, we needed to do the work to do our land use planning from our own way of how we would like to see it work. So all this led to the work with the communities, the First Nations Accord, and then they decided to go into the World Heritage Site. So they agreed to do that. They did the process and decided, okay, we need to work with the governments to do this. But the reason why they chose a mixed site, because the belief of the land and culture are inseparable. You cannot separate the two. So they agreed at that point, we're not going to do separate. We would have been okay with nature, we would have been okay with culture, but we cannot do them. And it was a very difficult decision and a difficult process to do this work. But they said, well, let's try it, and the elders made, go ahead, let's do this to further protect our lands. So remember, their whole existence as people is their interrelationship between culture and land. It's always been at the top of the nomination. So that's what they wanted to be the guidance, that don't lose sight of that. We cannot have both. And also another thing that we talk about language. We go and negotiate in the language that is foreign to us. We come back to the community and we do the whole thing in the language that's more understandable to the elders and which makes sense. Because when we come to the table with the government, there's different sets of beliefs and values of how they see the land and how they work with land and how they connect with the land. Totally different perspective. And that's always been why we would continue to work at that in that way. So Pimachiowin Aki means land that gives life, because this is where they have survived from. This is the land that gave them life to live to this day, that gave them resilience, you know, and the tenacity to be able to do things and survive and keep that land the way it is. And that's what has carried us through this process of doing this World Heritage Site. And this World Heritage Site hasn't been easy, because we have to work with UNESCO. Again, the translation of their words into our words and understanding was very, you know, it takes time. And this is the thing that you cannot rush into. And at times we did feel rush. But it brought really a lot of things back, rekindled the spirits of people and wanting to do something that will help or that will make their contribution to the rest of the world, because they know what was happening. They knew about climate change, and they knew the importance of trees and the work that they do to the environment. That was so important to them. And that's why the work behind it is for that. He says, we're making a contribution to the rest of the world by doing this. So if we continue to do this, and they also believed that, they strongly believed that in order for everything to heal, the people, the communities, the land, you know, we need to restore that balance within their communities. We need to teach our children and grandchildren the importance of understanding the relationship our people have with the land. And they said it depends, our life depends on it more than ever. So that was a very strong message that came from the community. But we started working together, I think in 2002. So everything kind of, there's so much. So I'm trying to highlight the important things that happened with this World Heritage Site. I think that
I mean,
that was our sorry.
Those are great examples. I mean, this is an amazing, like, I love the way that you said that you took your plans and strategies to the government. And, you know, even within our work within the Decolonizing Climate Policy project, we talk about how decolonizing policy, that this work, and Rebecca had it in her blog, so check it out on the ICA website, that this work envisions a world where Indigenous-led climate solutions are the standard, and where colonial structures are doing the work to figure out where their resources and knowledge can offer support to existing Indigenous systems, not the other way around. And that's exactly what you guys did with this project. You're like, here's our standards, our practices. This is how the land and the knowledge and the wisdom of the land has guided what we want to see for a vision for our community, for our territories. And what's so beautiful about this as well is also in this report that I referred to from the ICCA, and the report has been coined, oh my God, I think it's called, I've already forgotten, sorry, Territories of Life, which is so interesting because like Pimachiowin Aki is the land that gives life, and this report is Territories of Life. And one of the things it says is that Indigenous, the rights to self-determine governance systems, cultures, and collective lands and territories are missing link in order to address biodiversity and the climate crisis. And this would also contribute to social justice and sustainable development priorities. The other thing that they listed in here is that that when Indigenous people are given the right to govern and manage their lands and territories in the way that you have made progress, I know it's only 50%, but progress to do this, it also halts the drivers of biodiversity loss and climate breakdown, meaning it halts the threats onto our lands and territories, but also the violence against our people. Because at the beginning of your stories around this project and the experience of your community, you talked about the logging projects, the hydro projects that were threatening the land and just deteriorating the land, which holds the knowledge and wisdom. And so I love how you talked about one of the first steps is actually restoring balance in community. Because a lot of the time in the climate discourse, we get caught up in like just looking at it from an externality. The environment is something separate. Policy is something separate to police the environment almost. And it's like, we need to reduce the emissions, and we get stuck in like reducing emissions, which is absolutely critical because there's been an imbalance. But it's not just about balancing the emissions and the GHGs in the atmospheres. It's about restoring that balance in our communities that has been threatened by forms of colonization. So I'm really appreciating this very, very clear and tangible like process that your community went through in order to get to a point, because you're absolutely right. The different values and perspective are what drive the ways in which we develop policy. And when we are in relationship with land, it changes the ways in which we develop conservation policy from everything, not just talking about conservation as something like we need to conserve over here, but how do those value systems determine what our economies look like, what our education systems look like, what our trade routes look like, what our governments look like. All of it changes when we change the value system across the board, not just looking at conserving one little park or one little area over here, not just little. I mean, it's what you've done is amazing, but I'm just saying in the grand scheme of things, the colonial powers still utilize and manage land under their systems and structures. So how do we get this across the board? So if we were to look to the world that is Indigenous-led policy, so other projects like this in land management and protecting our relatives, because that's what this is about. We've talked about these are our relatives. The value systems are as we don't see ourselves separate from our lands and territory. In my own community, we are Kaitale Dene, which means people of the willow, which is a direct reference to where we come from. What would your vision be of how to create Indigenous-led policy? What would Indigenous-led climate policy look like? What is your vision for that?
Well, that's what it's like when I say the elders give the direction and guidance, when we do work, because the work starts at the ground level, the grassroots level, where people like right now, climate change is happening. We are affected by wildfires. We are affected by, dry season. So all those things are coming into play. What the elders have talked about, they have talked about, things changing quicker than things happen naturally. And I think even when we started our work, we had to prove our existence here on the land, we had to work with the anthropologists or the archaeologists, I'm sorry, to say, yeah, they've been here 6,000 years. But the elders said that. So to validate what we said, that we have been here for 6,000 or so years, wasn't taken seriously because they didn't recognize the elders' knowledge. But to validate all that, they had to get an archaeologist here, which is very insulting. It was insulting to us. But hey, what you have to work. And the archaeologist was actually a very nice woman to work with. So very respectful, very, very understanding. So I think there is work that needs to be done. And just talking about the Indigenous knowledge being recognized and validated that it's this is what we work with. Our land use plan was done by the elders who understood their surroundings. It didn't happen by accident that the land is still is intact. It did not happen, because nobody was around there. People have been there for thousands of years, used that land. But because of the belief that everything needs to go back, don't disturb it, be gentle with the earth and with the land around you. That's our policy. That's what we are taught from the beginning of, since we are children. We have seen and heard stories of communities that have lived through developments and how they destroyed their communities. They've were able to relate some of those stories, and we've heard from people from these communities and supporting the work that we do here. So I think under coming to an understanding that there is wisdom that can be incorporated into policies. Understanding and the knowledge, the indigenous knowledge, can be incorporated without any questions, but the communities know who they go to for things that need to be understood in the communities. So, and I think policies were only one-sided. They've caused a lot of grief in our communities. Policies for Indians, or I don't know if I should say that, but yeah, we do.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. Yeah.
That mindset need to change. The biggest challenge, I think that's the biggest challenge in working with policies, is the mindset need to change, and I think until that happens, I think, we can contribute with our indigenous knowledge to making policies that will help minimize what's happening out there on climate change, on water, and all that. But it needs to happen sooner, and I'm not sure.
I think I'd love to make some space for questions from the audience. So if you have questions, you can add them to the Q&A. We have a couple in there, but I just really want to expand on that, because I think that you talked about the recognition and the validation of Indigenous knowledge. We have, through our report that we did with Indigenous Climate Action on decolonizing climate policy in Canada, we really highlighted the fact that there's a lot of acknowledgement of Indigenous rights and Indigenous knowledge, but when it comes to implementing and incorporating it, we don't have that process. We have a government that, through the Pan-Canadian framework on climate change, which is the Canadian climate sort of plan at the national level, as well as the Healthy Economies and Healthy Environment report, they recognize and acknowledge Indigenous rights 168 times throughout the report. But when it comes to bringing knowledge holders into the discussions around setting policies and setting standards, setting, targets and goals, we aren't at those tables because our knowledge isn't recognized at the same level as science. No matter how many times, the archaeologists in your communities that validated and said, yep, actually everything they're saying is true, I'm not sure how many times we have to do that process, because this is a story that is told across Turtle Island, where Indigenous people say, hey, we actually know the answer to this scientific quandary you're in based on our knowledge, based on our relationship with the land. And they go, how do you know? They're like, well, because we know. They're like, let's get our scientists, our white colonial lens of science, to validate that before it's taken as valid and usable. And then even then, the white scientist is the one that holds this has been validated, and they get to present it. And I've watched this. I went down to the Amazon a couple of years ago during the case of the Waroni people who were challenging the expansion of oil and gas companies into their territory, where a white archaeologist came to validate, and she was the one that was explaining why their knowledge was so critical, why everything was so critical, and not allowing us to speak for ourselves. When we talk about decolonizing policy, it's exactly what you said. Like, we are our own experts. Our elders and land users need to be giving the direction that this knowledge has existed, and that we don't need to be validated through the colonial lens. And we absolutely need to be doing what you guys have done, which is like build your strategies and ask the government to explain how they're going to uphold them within their structures and systems. And we are really exploring this through our project right now within the Decolonizing Climate Policy in Canada project, and really trying to grapple with those challenges. How do we incorporate these values as the foundation of developing policy, which you're right, it's not really the right term. I think it's more around like, how do we bring our values into the governance in the way that we have for centuries to build these policies. So we do have a couple questions. Where do we want to start? I don't know if Rebecca, you've been following, if you have one that you want to throw out there. There's so many. There's some really good ones in here.
Actually, I'd like to give some context too. I've actually heard Sophia talk quite a number of times, and each time I talk to her, I learn something new, or each time I listen, I learn something new. So I really appreciate all that you're saying, and it's really to the heart of what my work is, and that's, does my Gugum understand this? Does my Gugum understand this? She actually called me just as I was listening to you, and I was like, well, I'm listening to another drama right now. Can you call me back later? And she's like, oh, well, don't you get breaks? I said, not right now. And I was like, I'm going to talk about you though. And she's like, okay, well, call me and tell me what you said about me. So, but anyway, yes, I've been following along on some of the questions, and a lot, I think, when doing the phase 1 report and then flowing into the phase 2 of Indigenous-led climate policy, it really looks like, how do we start to take control of enforcing this? So Michael Zhang had asked, how do we incorporate Indigenous wisdom into policy in a way that's not appropriation when the government largely enforcing and controlling policy is colonial? That's a great question. And I would love to hear from Sophia, like how you feel that we can tackle this, because you know what? Sophia is our expert. And I want to give recognition to that.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that, but I will try, Are you done, Rebecca? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Didn't cut me off, go ahead.
During all this work, there were a lot of criticism that came along with stopping logging, stopping other projects that they were going to develop this area, and then we had defers in our land use. In our nomination for World Heritage Site, we had 3 attempts, and finally in 2018 it was declared a World Heritage Site. But the process took longer, and there are times where we got discouraged because people would say, I remember when where I would start to question. People would say, well, are you going to continue to keep your people in poverty because you're stopping development, you're stopping the benefits of employment and all that? And you stop to think, how long is it going to benefit the people and the community? It's always been short-term activities or projects. And this is, once we disrupt the land, once we disrupt everything around it, it's takes a while to get it back to the state that it was. And going back to it, but we have to keep trying. You know, things are going to change slowly. Like I said, the biggest challenge is changing the mindset of people, devaluing our way of life, devaluing our worldviews, devaluing everything that we believe in. But does that stop us from continuing to work of what we were taught as Indigenous people? Yeah, there are policies that really hurt a lot of our communities. Just recently, just right now, that was the policy of educating Indigenous children and taking the Indian out of a child. That was a policy. But I see today many of our young people taking part in sun dances, in ceremonies, you know, and that to me is something, is looking good. It's good. It's really good. It feels good. And that's what my purpose is, to help these young people find their way back. And that I was thinking about when we did our land use plan, when we would go to the legislative, there was 2 Indigenous cabinet ministers there in the same room with us. And they understood where we were coming from. And having that support from these 2 Indigenous cabinet ministers and convincing their colleagues, I think was good. So I think we need to look at ways to get our young people educated and get them into those roles where they make policies, you know, where they will have the guidance and direction from elders and from communities. That's what we need to work on. Many of our young people are in the positions now that they are part of policy making. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen, you know, maybe in my lifetime, but I think I really do. But I have to hang on to that hope that, you know, these things, the policies to make things right for our Indigenous people. There just been so much social injustice done to our people. But like I said, that land gives us the wisdom and the knowledge to know that, you know, we have the resilience and tenacity to live through whatever, no matter what policies. There is resurgence of evidence on that, how, you know, we're not, those policies are not going to keep our people down, but we have to make it there to be part of those policies, is what I often tell the young people. And not just Indigenous young people. We have young people that come into our community to learn about the work that's been done here. And I tell them, all you hear or read about Indigenous people is usually negative. Mm-hmm. Look around you and look at all the people you have met and how they're just like you. You know, they want a good life. And one of these days, someday, you'll be in a position to make policies about Indigenous people or anything that would, you know, impact the Indigenous people. Think of that. Think of those people that opened their homes to you, that shared their meal with you, that shared stories with you, that welcomed you into your community. So that's, I think, that's one way of looking into the future of how we can be part of policy and changing those
Yeah,
mindsets.
I think that's a beautiful, like the idea is that we have to have all parts. It's not, we all need to be a part of colonial processes and be MPs and go through the, you know, Western colonial education system. That's an important aspect of it. So it's like not to downgrade those that do that, because we need you. There are roles. There are so many roles in our communities that we have to look at. Those that are holding those spaces, so that when we come with our decolonial policies, they understand and they can advocate within those structures and systems and advance us beyond beyond the 50% ownership or management of our lands and territories, that we are able to have our allies within those spaces. And I think like that's a really important starting point. But really, what I've heard you say over and over again is like, we need to have our knowledge recognized as the same as and just as important as, you know, Western science. I know Jen Lash just said that she had to leave, and but I did want to give time for this as the last question, because I think it's a great question. Maybe she'll be able to watch this afterwards. But the question she asked was, so how can Indigenous knowledge that we've talked about as being so fundamental and important be gathered in a way to feed climate models so that it can inform both Indigenous and non-Indigenous governments? How do we gather the knowledge so that it can be used to inform these models, climate models and policies? That's a big question. I mean, I think however you want to answer it, or if you're just like, I don't know. I mean, like, I'm not sure, but I would love to hear your response, and also Rebecca as well.
Yeah, well, I think what we did, the work that we are doing here in our communities and surrounding communities, is using that Indigenous knowledge, like to protect, preserve the land for the future. That's the beginning of it, and the work that has been done in other communities and other Indigenous communities, and I think it's slowly happening. I see to restore that balance. I think, you know, there are still a lot of people out there that are standing up against the pipeline. We still have them out there, and those are very diligent, you know, very important people that are out there. Those young people that are out there protecting, you know, trying to bring that their work up front, to say, you know, this is not acceptable anymore. So as I think, as the Indigenous knowledge is it can work. It can like we've used it in our World Heritage Site. You know, even though like when it got deferred twice because of the report from the evaluators, you know, we took it out there and said, you know, this is unacceptable. We don't accept this because it continues to perpetuate racism of what you said about Indigenous people. So at the same time, we often have to educate the other people that we are working with. But if we stand up to that knowledge, because it's who we are, it depends on the future of children, the future of our communities. So I think many communities have started that work of using their Indigenous knowledge to continue to protect and to preserve the everything around them, the language. You know, there are many language that are trying to bring that language back. And I think when you talk about decolonizing, and we often have this discussion because if each community, like, it starts in the language. What do we mean by decolonizing policy? What does that mean in our language and in our way of life? How is that interpreted? And there are very interesting discussions and debates, with this because I understand it differently. Because in my language, every emotion, everything that I feel is tied to my language, which is Anishinaabe. I have to really understand it first before I can, able to translate it into another foreign language, because English is not my first language. It's Anishinaabe, and that's my perspective. That's my world. That's where my worldview comes from, and how we treat things. That's going to be, and I think that's the problem we had when we did our World Heritage Site. They did not understand the sacredness and the spirituality that was tied to the culture and the land. So they had to change some of their things to understand, to be able to understand that connection, the intangible, to understand the intangibles that we were referring to when we said, the spirits of the land are still there. It is hard concept for them to understand and to work them into their policies. Why do you want to protect this area? There is a lot of life, and to them, they don't see life. They see profit, it's commodity. Mm-hmm. But as an Anishinaabe, that belongs to my great, 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 great grandchildren. And I want them to have what I enjoyed in life from that land. It's not a commodity. It's who I am. That's where my ancestors are. And they're still there. We still feel them. We still feel that energy. And that's the concept that we have to. Will they ever understand? I don't know. Will that have an effect on the policies? Definitely. Because that's where we're coming from. It's deeper. It's not just a piece of paper. And many of us, it's not my job to work as, it's my lifetime commitment to tell the young people, this is what that land means. This is the spiritual part. This is why it's so sacred. Yeah. That's my lifelong commitment. It's not a job. It's not a job I take with the province. When their day ends, they don't think about it. But it's me, it's continuous. I go put out tobacco when I take something. I go by the river and pray for that water. That's something that's not, and when I talk about Indigenous knowledge, that's what entails. I'm not sure if they will, how you would incorporate that into their understanding, or I don't know.
Part of the struggle, Sophia, is that we're trying to fit our worldview, our languages into their boxes. So when people start to say, how can Indigenous knowledge be, like what Jen had asked was a really good question, like feed into climate models. No, we need to take a flip of how we're doing these types of things. Somebody in the comment section also said, we need to change the way we hire these policymakers. Nail on the head right there, right? Because we need to start looking at how we have these already systems in place that feed into these policies. So part of that is like, who's the science expert? Who's the policymaker? And Ariel took a limb out on me, I think, made me research and policy analyst. And I think it's because the knowledge that I sit and listen to community members, I sit and listen to elders and knowledge keepers, and that's not a job for me. That is my way of life. And the land, the water, that means everything to me. So every way I walk into this world and all of these conversations that I've had are my way of life. And I think that perspective is how we start to change these models and these systems. You hire people based on those tenets. You don't hire them based on, my master's in political science. I don't have that, but that's how we start to change the way we look at these models and these systems. Who are we hiring into these positions? What's the gatekeeping that's involved in those positions? I want to thank you so much for all of your words. Like I said, every single time I have an opportunity to listen to you, I always learn something new, and it's always reinforced and helped me walk in this path that much better. So
I just want to share you a little story, just a short story about these evaluators that came and did evaluation on our land. So they're flying through this forest, and one of the guys, one of the scientists says, well, where are the monuments? I don't know if he said that jokingly, and because their mindset is they've been, when they did their World Heritage Sites are mostly monuments or buildings, but for us, it was this vibrant life of that's still there and still used by people, throughout this territory. So, and that's something that determined their decision, and they totally missed the point, and the nomination package. It just shows that, along the way, we have to keep educating people and then make them understand. Maybe it's not meant to be understood. I don't know. I don't know about that, but yeah, it's going to be a long journey for policymakers, and how it's, our worldview is going to be acknowledged.
Thank you so much for these stories. Messi cho hi miigwech to the speakers. I also just want to state that that last question is how do we gather this knowledge? I think that's the challenge, is that we have this different perspective of how knowledge is stored. And within the systems of colonization and systems of white supremacy, there is this worship of the written word versus the ways in which our communities transmit and share and pass on our knowledge, and that how do we collect this knowledge is a big question. So I'm also a part of the local communities Indigenous Peoples platform, which is under the United Nations Forum Convention on Climate Change, looking at global climate change issues. And we have been grappling with how do we collect all of this beautiful knowledge to help inform policy. But the biggest concern is how do we safeguard our knowledge from appropriation? And a lot of our communities are doing the processes that you talked about, Sophia. We are building our own healing centers, transmission of knowledge, ensuring that our knowledge is safe. And it first and foremost, it is our community's knowledge. It is for our communities. It is for our future generations. And it's not for the consumption of the colonial world. And I think that needs to be acknowledged, that we are not here to help build colonial structures. We want to deconstruct and make room for ours that have been left out and excluded for centuries. It's time for us to move past lip service of acknowledging Indigenous peoples and our knowledge as important and critical, without giving us the power to create those structures on our own terms, based on our own value systems and foundations of our relationships with the natural world. And so we have to move towards this paradigm shift, changing the mindset, as Sophia has said over and over again in this session. And I just want to thank you so much, because you have demonstrated what it means to move through a process that is decolonial, that is driven by community, that is driven by our relationships, not just with the land, but with each other, and uncoupling ourselves and undoing the harms of colonization, but also demonstrating what it means to work in partnership and pulling together the fact that we can do this together and that we are doing it together, but we need to be moving. I think we need to be moving the line further and saying, we don't just want 50%, we want control. We want land back, we want water back, we want our education back, we want our systems back, and we want them to be valued and included, not just consulted and sidelined. And so I just want to thank Rebecca for all of the amazing work that she's been doing with this project, Sophia for joining us here today, and we are excited to continue these conversations on what decolonizing climate policy will look like as part of this project in a webinar series. We'll have a webinar each month for the next few months as part of that project to work with our communities in a broader framework, launching surveys and questionnaires for folks to participate in, and really start diving into how do we start to build these policies or these governance structures for ourselves, by ourselves, without the interruption of the colonial lens, so that we can determine how do we build these processes of partnership together for the betterment of our communities and for the betterment of this planet. And with that, I just want to say, Masicho, hi. Thank you so much. Someone did ask about donations. You can check indigenousclimateaction.com. We have a donate, get involved button. There's also all sorts of ways to get involved on the website. Please do donate and support this project in any way you can. If you want to get more involved, again, email Rebecca at climatepolicy@indigenousclimateaction.com. And thank you so much. Hi, masicho, miigwech.
Thank you.
Thank you.